I spent 41 days of my life making a tower defense game where you can combine towers to upgrade them. The game went through multiple changes and crises, so I will just tell you how I started. After finishing my last game, I was looking for video game ideas to do next. One useful way to find a creative idea is by mixing two already existing genres or mechanics. I went with tower defense and cards. The initial plan was to make a game where you had cards of different types. Generators that produce currency for more cards, attackers that deal damage to the enemies, defenders that get targeted first to distract the enemies, and buffers that give abilities to the surrounding cards. And it also occurred to me that it would be fun if you could combine those cards to make more powerful ones. Pretty different from what it ended up being. The first step was making some basic movement and allowing you to place stuff on the map. But there should be some minimum distance among the structures for you to place another one. I implemented it, but it wasn't until much later that I put a visualizer so you could see the distance required. In most tower defense games, there are paths for the enemies to follow. You can only put the towers outside the path, but I want to place the defender towers in the way to interrupt the enemy's path. So I made that you can place the towers everywhere, and made the invaders, basically the enemies of the game that will find their way to the base by avoiding or attacking obstacles. At this point, I've only been developing the game for 2 days, but I think that adding the cards part to the game would be forcing something that I don't think it's going to work as I want. Instead, I doubled down on the tower combination mechanic. But before making the combination mechanic, I needed to have other things first, like the currency that I displayed in the UI and the generator that generates currency every second. Even though there's no visual feedback for it yet, I made the invaders attack the base when they get to it and made it destroyable. When that happens, the game should be over. Going back to the initial plan, I started implementing the buffers type, but I decided to make the main mechanic more important by removing it, which also makes the balancing of the game easier for my future self. Now, with all the things I needed in place, I made the tower combination logic, and it works this way. You can combine the basic structures with any other basic structure, but after the first combination, the tower can only be combined with an equal tower. Even though the logic is in place, you still can't see it because there are no models for the towers. So that's the next objective. I decided to stick with a really simple style, but make sure that the shapes for the structures would be easily recognizable. The base structures have a basic shape. A cube for the defenders, a pyramid for the attackers, and a hexagonal prism for the generators. The combinations are kind of a fusion between the shapes. I spent the next 2 days setting up the models and adapting the structure combining logic to handle them. The way you combine the towers is by selecting one structure with left click and another with right click, making their stats appear in the UI, and allowing you to press the space key to combine them. Terrible controls, I know, but I'll change them later. Reaching the 2 weeks mark, I made the structure health appear on top of the selected structure and added buttons in the UI for combining and destroying the already placed structures. Next, I created more invaders for variety that have different speeds, health, attack target preference, and even flying. But the problem now is that they still look the same. Before solving that problem, I made the color of a structure the mix between the colors of the structures that were combined to make it. And the color saturation reflects how many times a structure has been combined. With that out of the way, I sketched some design ideas for the new invaders, modeled them in Blender, and imported them into Unity. Then I set them up with their moving pieces and extra details and updated the invader spawner to start spawning just one invader variant and progressively unlock and start spawning the others. I had 2 ideas of how the match progression should go. One, a limited wave system, like the one in Black Ops Zombies, where you defeat waves of enemies and you get some time where enemies don't spawn between waves. Or what I chose, just endless enemy spawning, more powerful enemies get unlocked with time, and they also spawn progressively faster. Because of that decision, I made the cost of the cards scale each time you buy one, so it doesn't get too easy. The following days were pretty boring, just fixing some bugs and doing some minor stuff, like confining your movement to the map so you don't get away from it, a game over sequence, and some designs for the tower cards in the UI. With that, we already reached the 3 weeks mark. We already have the core functionality for the game, even though it sucks. Because there's no feedback for your actions anywhere, so it doesn't feel impactful. That's a big problem. But I'll come back to fix it later, because now it's UI time. So I made the base functionality for the settings, game over screen, and the main menu, and then redesigned all the UI in the game. But there still is a big part of the UI missing. In the next 3 days, I made the 3 parts of it. First, I made the structures part. Here you can see all the possible tower combinations, and you can click them to see specific info about them, including how to reach that combination. Then the invaders part, where you can do basically the same but with the invaders. And to finish the guide, I built the how to play part, which is some text that covers all the game mechanics. When I finished the guide, I made the visualizer for the minimum area among structures that I showed you before, so you know exactly where you can and cannot place towers. That was day 28, hitting the 4 weeks mark. I asked a friend to playtest the game with me, and he gave me a lot of feedback to make the game better. Some of the most important stuff was that the controls were shit, and the gameplay UI sucked because it obstructed the view too much. I totally agree with what my friend said, and I will use the feedback he gave me to improve the game. But since nobody's gonna play the game yet, I left it for later and started working on the feedback for your actions, aka game views. So basically, the next day I added a bunch of cool stuff like camera shake, animation, and particles when placing and combining structures, another animation with a color change for when a structure is attacked, more particles and screen shake for when a structure gets destroyed, smoke and fire particles for the invaders, impact particles and camera shake on projectile impact that varies in intensity depending on the distance to the camera, and made the invaders shrink for a moment when attacked. These kinds of things make the game look and feel better instantly, and transformed the boring experience it was before into an almost decent one. But there still is some juice to add to this game. So I made particles for invaders elimination, an animation for structures firing, and animated the currency text and the score text on the game over screen. That's enough game juice for now. It's time to implement the feedback my friend gave me. I had to replace the clicking two structures to combine them for something more intuitive. To replace it, I made that you have to click and drag a structure to the one you want to combine it with. The line you see now is a placeholder, but I will change it later for something that looks better. That freed the right click that now is used to inspect the towers and also invaders. As my friend said, the gameplay UI was way too big, so I redesigned it to make it smaller and cleaner, and remapped the controls to keys that make more sense. The next day, I changed the line for a better looking indicator of the combination direction and gave outlines to the to-be combined structures. After that, I redesigned the structure cards for the new UI size and gave them an animation and mouse hover. The last things that were related to the feedback my friend gave me was displaying the game controls while playing, because no one will actually read the guide, and instead of score, now there is time survived. The game is taking form and in its current state is fully playable. Now what it needs is some polishing and more maps. I started the polishing with the projectiles. I used to have types of projectiles with a set color and set attack power, but I changed them for a modular projectile that is assigned the attack power by the tower that shoots it, and its color is the same as that tower. I redesigned the map and designed two more. With the designs ready, I spent most of the 33rd day implementing them into the game. Another thing that needs some polishing is the way the invaders spawn, because it doesn't look good. To cover that, I made a simple 3D model that resembles a factory from where the invaders spawn. The next thing that I improved is the game over animation for the base structure on the game over sequence that I completely changed so it looks way better. Polishing is all about detail, and there's one big detail I haven't even talked about. The game doesn't have any audio. So I made and found some sound effects for invalid combination, projectile firing, projectile impact, tower placement, tower combination, and a sound effect for when you click a tower to combine with each other. When implemented, they sound like this. To further polish the game, I made that the sound effects volume would change depending on how close the camera is to the source. So the further away you are, the less you hear them. And also made the pitch of the combination sound change on change the combinations, making it sound like this. I spent the end of day 35 adding sound effects for the UI, making us reach the 5 weeks mark on the development. The next 6 days I did a lot of the same stuff, just adding more sound effects, adding images for the guide, fixing stuff, and adding some minor things to make the game feel great, until I finished it on day 41. You have seen a lot of the process of how this dumb idea of tower defense plus cards game transformed into another dumb idea, tower defense plus combination game. You can play the game for free in the link in the description, and let me know what you think here on YouTube or on itch. See you at the next one.